They say a wooden gavel is just a tool, lifeless, harmless, but on a winter day in 1995, inside a dusty courthouse deep in the southern town of Belridge, that gavel fell like a blade, not on a desk, not on a case, but straight through the life of a man named Jeremiah Cole. Hey friend, before we go any further, I want to pause for a moment and check in. How are you doing today? I hope you and your loved ones are safe, healthy, and wrapped in peace. Because what I'm about to share isn't just a story about the past. It's about truth denied and the fire that refused to die. It's about a father torn from his child and the daughter who came back for him 3 decades later. Let's step into that old courtroom together. The judge's voice was dry, like a mouthful of dust. Jeremiah Cole, guilty of theft, sentenced to 20 years. No inflection, no mercy, just words that fell like bricks onto the thin shoulders of a black mechanic with worn boots and grease-stained hands. Jeremiah didn't cry. He didn't collapse. He just stood there, sweating through a faded button-down, frozen as though his life had just been scraped clean. "I'm innocent," he cried, voice breaking open like a cracked bell. "I didn't steal anything. Please, look at my daughter." But the walls didn't flinch, the people didn't listen, and the judge didn't care. In the last row, a little girl stood as still as death. Her name was Camille Cole. She was 5 years old. Big brown eyes shimmered like wet glass, locked onto the image of her father being shackled by men in uniforms. She didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because it made no sense. How could the man who tucked her in each night with lullabies and warm laughter now be dragged away like a stranger? A social worker stepped forward, voice sharp like a snap branch. "Take her." Cold fingers wrapped around Camille's tiny wrists. She screamed, but not out loud. Her scream stayed in her chest, buried beneath the weight of disbelief. The door slammed shut behind her. Not just any door, a steel one. And when it clanged closed, it sealed more than just a room. It sealed away her childhood. As they led her through a dim hallway, a whisper snuck into her ear. "Your daddy's a criminal," the woman hissed, her breath dry and cruel. "You'll end up just like him." But what they didn't see, what they couldn't measure, was the quiet fire that flickered inside Camille's little chest that day. A Hataro's outline ember, a vow that no one else heard, but she would never forget. Because what happened in that courtroom wasn't justice, it was a sentence, passed not just on a man, but on a child. And she would carry it all the way to 2025. The place they took her to wasn't a home, it was a warehouse of forgotten children. The Belridge Girls' Shelter sat at the edge of town like a leftover promise, gray, damp, and crumbling at the edges. The walls sweated mildew. The food tasted like cardboard soaked in metal. The workers moved like ghosts, bitter ones. Camille was dumped onto a creaky bunk. No words, no warmth, just orders. The other girls circled her like wolves with empty stomachs. "The thief's daughter," one sneered. Another spat on the floor near her feet. "Your daddy's trash, and so are you." They didn't know what they were poking. That night, one of the bigger girls grabbed Camille's jacket. Not just any jacket, her father's old work coat, the only thing of him she had left. Stained with grease, smelling of oil and motor metal. "Give it here," the girl barked. Camille didn't. She swung, fists flying, heart pounding. Her small hands knew they couldn't win, but something in her refused to back down. The fight ended with blood and bruises, none of which belonged to the bully. They threw Camille into a supply closet, locked the door, let her cry in the dark. But she didn't cry. She sat against the cold wall, arms wrapped tight around that jacket, and whispered into the silence, "He's not a thief. He's my daddy." No one answered. No one came. The world didn't care what a 5-year-old black girl believed. But in that moment, the first ember caught flame. A fire began inside her. Not a loud one, a quiet, determined burn. Miles away behind rusted bars, her father was fighting his own war. Jeremiah Cole had become a number, no longer a man, just another shadow in a cage made of rust and forgotten dreams. He worked in the prison yard by day, swinging a pickaxe under the sun until his fingers bled. At night, when the guards weren't watching, he'd pull out scraps of paper torn from anywhere he could find. With a pencil worn down to its nub, he'd write letters. To her, his handwriting was crooked, but the words were iron. They blame me because of my skin, Camille, but don't let them break you, ever. I am your father, and I am innocent. He hid those pages under his thin mattress, hoping they'd survive even if he didn't. Time chewed away at him. The food was spoiled, the air heavy with coughs. The prison doctor didn't come. Tuberculosis sank its teeth into him, slow, cruel, final. But at night, when he could barely breathe, Jeremiah would still whisper to the ceiling, "I just want to see her smile again. One more time." That prayer floated into the dark, but it never came back. Camille didn't know her father was dying. Not yet. She was still that skinny girl in the orphanage, ignored, insulted, but unbroken. The workers threw scraps at her like she was a stray dog. Other girls passed her in the hallway, hissing, "Thief's daughter." Camille kept her head down, but her jaw clenched tight. She watched, she waited, and she remembered. At night, when the moonlight cracked through the blinds, she'd sit on the windowsill, the jacket wrapped around her like armor. "I know you didn't do it, Daddy," she'd whisper to the stars. "I know, and I'm gonna prove it." At 5 years old, she made a promise no one heard but the sky itself. But the sky, it listens. In the spring of 2015, after 2 decades behind concrete and cold, Jeremiah Cole took his last breath in a prison cot barely wider than his shoulders. The death certificate read tuberculosis, but those who knew better, who bothered to look past the ink, would say the real cause was something far deeper: injustice. He died as he had lived for 20 years, alone, without a name, without a visit, without the chance to hear his daughter's voice again. But in the final weeks of his fading strength, he pressed one last hope into the hands of a man he trusted, a fellow inmate named Royce Banner, a tired soul with calloused hands and a silent kind of decency. "Give this to Camille," Jeremiah had whispered one morning, his voice shredded and thin. "She needs to know the truth." He coughed blood onto the bed sheets that day, and by nightfall, he was gone. Royce didn't cry. He just folded the bundle of worn pages, Jeremiah's final words, and tucked them into the lining of his coat. And then he waited. 1 year passed. The world moved on, but in a cramped apartment above a corner deli in Knoxdale, a young black woman was just beginning her life. Camille Cole, now 26, was scraping by on student debt and resilience. Fresh out of law school, her days were filled with coffee stains, legal briefs, and ramen noodles. She'd made it, barely. But no one told her that survival doesn't always feel like victory. Then came the knock, a slow, uncertain knock, like someone wasn't sure they belonged on her doorstep. Camille opened the door to find an older man standing there. His coat was threadbare. His eyes were sunken and lined with the kind of truth you don't learn from books. You're Jeremiah's girl, right?" he asked, voice like gravel under boots. Camille blinked. She hadn't heard her father's name spoken out loud in years. Before she could answer, the man pulled out a bundle, faded, folded, fragile. Dozens of yellowed pages tied with string, edges curled like leaves in autumn. "He wanted you to have this," he said simply. She didn't invite him in, didn't have to. She took the bundle in both hands. Her fingers trembled. And then she sank to the floor, right there, her back against the wall, the papers in her lap. The moment she saw her father's handwriting, uneven, cracked like his voice, everything around her dissolved. Camille, they took everything from me. But they can't take what I know to be true. I did not steal. I did not lie. I did not leave you. They did that." She read until the words blurred. Tears soaked the ink, her body shaking from a pain she thought she'd already buried. "Don't let them break you, baby. You are not what they called you. You are mine, and I am not guilty." That night, grief didn't just knock her down. It set fire to her soul. She didn't cry for pity. She cried for justice. "I'll make them pay for what they did to you, Dad," she whispered into the shadows. "I swear on everything I am. They will see you. They will know." That promise didn't come from a place of anger. It came from a place far more dangerous, love that refused to die. Most people think anger is loud, but Camille Cole's anger? It was quiet. Quiet like a river cutting through rock. Quiet like a vow whispered to the moon every night. After the bundle of letters arrived, something shifted in her. Not suddenly, but fully. She no longer just wanted to survive law school. She needed to win. That orphanage had tried to put out her fire 100 different ways. The other kids, still kids, but old enough to be cruel, called her thief's daughter, like it was a name carved in stone. The adults weren't any better. Some threw out food near her like she was some stray dog. Others muttered things just loud enough to be heard. Kids like her don't end up anywhere but back in the system. But Camille never forgot what her daddy wrote. "You are not what they say. You are mine." She clung to that, like breath, like truth. At night, while the other kids slept under threadbare blankets, she tiptoed into the orphanage's old library. Dust coated every shelf. Light bulbs flickered like tired eyes. But she didn't care. She'd climb onto the stool and reach for the law books, thick, heavy, unread. She didn't understand all the words, but she read them anyway, whispering to herself, "I gotta know why they took him. Why they let it happen." By 16, she was working 2 shifts at Ray's Diner, scrubbing dishes until her fingers cracked. She kept a small notebook tucked into her apron, stealing moments to write down words she'd heard in court shows, habeas corpus, motion to vacate, due process. At 20, she collapsed once at the sink, dizzy, overworked, but she dragged herself back to her books before the sun rose. She fought tooth and nail for a scholarship. One professor said she was too intense. She smiled and said, "I have work to do," and she meant it. Every examination, every paper, every courtroom simulation. She wasn't learning to become a lawyer. She was preparing to bring her father back from the dead, in name, in truth, in history. By 2025, Camille wasn't the girl they left behind anymore. She was a practicing attorney, sharp, tough, and absolutely unbreakable. She worked with a nonprofit that dug into wrongful convictions. Every file, every sleepless night, every client was part of her deeper mission, to crack open the lie they buried her father beneath. And then she found it. One evening, elbow deep in old case files, Camille came across a dusty box from 1995. It held a tape, barely labeled, nearly forgotten. She popped it into the player. A scratchy voice filled the room. "Just pin it on the black guy." "Easy enough," a man chuckled. Her stomach turned. The voice? The Belridge police chief, laughing. She gripped the edge of the table, her jaw clenched, but her hands didn't shake. Because this was it. Proof. She didn't stop there. She tracked down the man who testified against Jeremiah. He was frail now, eyes yellowed, but the guilt still lived inside him. He confessed. "They paid me," he whispered. "Said I'd go down next if I didn't lie." She filed the motion to reopen the case that night. Her hands hovered over the keyboard before she hit send. And when she did, she whispered through clenched teeth, "They're going to hear you now, Daddy." 3 decades after Jeremiah Cole was dragged from that courtroom in shackles, his daughter walked back through the very same doors. Only this time, she wasn't a shadow in the back row. She was the storm coming through the front. It was summer 2025, and the town of Belridge was holding its breath. The motion to reopen her father's case had gone viral. Headlines swirled, talk shows argued. But Camille didn't care about the noise. She didn't come for cameras. She came for the truth. She wore a navy blue suit, not expensive, but clean, crisp, strong. She stepped through the double doors like a blade, and in her hands she carried something far heavier than her legal brief, the diary. The same bundle of pages her father had written in the dark, the same letters stained with sweat, blood, and hope. The courtroom was packed, reporters, activists, locals who remembered that case but had never looked too closely. They came to see if justice still had a heartbeat. At the front, seated behind the defense table, was Daniel Harper, the man who had once pounded a gavel and sent Jeremiah away. He was older now, 65, his hair gone white. The arrogance had faded, but the avoidance remained. He looked up when Camille entered. Their eyes met, and something shifted in him. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Her voice rang through the room like a church bell. 30 years ago, my father, Jeremiah Cole, was convicted in this very room, but he wasn't guilty. He was convenient. A hush fell. Even the air seemed to pause. Daniel Harper's voice cracked, brittle as old paper. I followed the law back then, he said. But even he didn't believe it. Camille stepped forward. She pulled out the tape recorder, pushed play. The voice of the 1995 police chief filled the room, raspy and smug. Pin it on the black guy, easy enough. The courtroom stiffened. Some gasped. Others looked down. Next came the witness, the man who once lied under oath. He stood in front of the crowd now, trembling. They threatened me, he said. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do. Then Camille dropped the documents, proof of hush money, names, bank statements, dirty trails leading to one man's downfall. This wasn't a mistake, she said, eyes locked on Harper. This was betrayal. Daniel Harper's hands trembled. I don't recall the details, he muttered. But Camille wasn't done. She took one step closer, diary in hand. If you don't remember, then let my father remind you. She opened the worn pages. Her voice now quivered, but not with fear, with rage, with love. The day they sentenced me, she read aloud, I wasn't a man anymore, just a name they could blame. I looked at my little girl one last time, and the judge turned away. Gasps rippled through the room. A pen dropped. A woman sobbed quietly in the back. Camille stared down Daniel Harper. That was you, she said. You turned away. You let him die. For a moment, silence swallowed everything. Then Harper stood up so fast his chair screeched. I can't, his voice cracked. I can't do this anymore. Everyone froze. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. And then, between sobs, he confessed, I knew he was innocent. I was warned. They told me to stay quiet, and I did. I'm sorry. God help me. I'm so sorry. Camille stood still. A single tear slid down her cheek. But her voice? Steady. You're sorry, she said, soft but sharp. He spent 20 years in a cage, died alone. And you're sorry? She raised the diary. He fought for me until his last breath. You don't get to cry your way out of this. The crowd roared. The dam had broken. History cracked wide open. Camille turned to the judge. That's his truth. Now you decide. When the gavel fell in that courtroom, this time not to sentence, but to set free, the sound wasn't sharp or cruel. It was soft, almost merciful, like a door unlocking after years of rust and denial. The judge's words were simple. The conviction of Jeremiah Cole is vacated. The court acknowledges the injustice done. Just like that, 30 years of lies cracked open. Jeremiah's name finally cleared. Daniel Harper didn't protest. He didn't even lift his eyes. He sat slumped in his seat, his hands limp, his face soaked in tears that came too late to save a life, but not too late to change his own. In the days that followed, he vanished from the public eye. No interviews, no press conferences, just a quiet man walking through the ruins of his choices. One afternoon, he showed up at a nonprofit legal center in Atlanta. He handed over a check, his personal wealth, what was left of it. "Use this," he said, "for the ones still waiting for justice." They did, and the name on the fund, the Camille Cole Initiative. Weeks later, he visited a grave beneath a crooked oak tree. There was no fanfare, no cameras, just a single white flower trembling in his wrinkled hand. He knelt and whispered into the wind, "I chase my own safety, my own comfort, but I never slept right after what I did to you. I owe you everything." The wind stirred gently through the leaves, but the grave did not reply, because some reckonings don't come with closure, only the weight of living with what can't be undone. Camille didn't go to court the day after. She didn't check the headlines. Instead, she drove to the cemetery, quietly, alone. The sun was setting, bathing her father's headstone in gold. She walked slowly, her heels crunching against the gravel, the diary clutched close to her chest like a second heartbeat. She knelt, set the journal down gently, ran her fingers across the worn cover. "Dad," she whispered, "I did it. Justice came back for you." Her voice cracked, but her hands were steady. "I forgive him, Dad, not because he deserves it, but because I still hear you singing me to sleep. You kept hate out of my heart. I won't let it in now." A breeze lifted the edge of the diary, software like her father's voice in her memory. She smiled, just barely, and closed her eyes. In Belridge, the story traveled like wildfire, the girl who brought the truth back from the dead, the diary that tore through decades of silence. Coffee shop conversations turned into community meetings. People whispered, then shouted, then organized. But Camille, she went quiet again, because her work wasn't for headlines, it was for her father, and the others like him. It began quietly. No banners, no ribbon cutting, just a single name printed in black ink on a white envelope, the Camille Cole Initiative. Funded by the fallen judge who had once doomed a man, the initiative started with a single mission: to lift the wrongly accused from the shadows, to give them what Jeremiah never got, a fighting chance. The first check went to a young man named Tobias King, just 21, facing life for a crime he didn't commit. Sounded familiar, because it was. Camille met him on a rainy morning in Atlanta. He wore the same look her father once had in those faded photos. Tired eyes, tight shoulders, dignity hanging on by a thread. He asked one question, "Why are you helping me?" And she answered without missing a beat, "Because someone should have helped my father, and now it's my turn." From there, the initiative grew, one case at a time, one life at a time. Men and women, mostly Black, mostly poor, stepped into the light for the first time in years. Camille didn't seek fame. She didn't want awards. She wanted truth. And she wanted her father's name to stand for something other than a headline in 1995. Back in Belridge, old scars reopened. Reporters returned. They asked questions this time, hard ones. Why had no one spoken up? Why did the system fold so easily under the weight of skin color? The town grumbled, then reckoned, then remembered. In coffee shops and kitchens, people began to say it out loud. We were wrong. She made us see it. That girl, Camille, she turned history on its head. But Camille wasn't interested in being a symbol. She was too busy fighting, filing motions, teaching younger lawyers how to dig, how to not give up. She carried her father's diary with her like a pocket Bible, not just to remember him, but to remind herself, the system doesn't correct itself. People do. And yet, for all her strength, she still drove out to the cemetery sometimes, just to sit, to talk, to listen. Sometimes she read his letters out loud, even when no one was there to hear. Sometimes she just let the wind do the speaking, because while she had built something powerful out of pain, she never stopped being that little girl in a faded dress, clutching a work jacket like a lifeline, whispering through tears, "I believe you, Daddy." And now, the world believed him too. Forgiveness doesn't come in a rush. It doesn't arrive in the applause, or the courtroom silence, or the ink on legal papers. It comes later, in the stillness, in the decision to put down a weight you've carried for too long. Camille forgave Daniel Harper, not for him, but for herself, because as much as anger had fueled her fire, it was love that kept it burning. She never forgot her father's lullabies, the way his voice sounded, deep, warm, a little scratchy, when he said, "You're my whole world, baby girl." That love had outlived a sentence, outlived a system that tried to silence it, outlived death itself. And because of that, she could let go, but she didn't walk away. She stayed in the courtroom, in the fight, in the ache of every new name that came across her desk, because she knew for every Jeremiah there were 100 more, and they needed someone who knew what it meant to lose everything and still stand. So now, I want to turn to you. Yes, you, listening, watching, remembering. Have you ever seen someone judged before they had a chance to speak? Have you ever watched truth get buried beneath power? Have you ever had to forgive someone, not because they asked, but because you were tired of carrying their sin on your back? Friend, if Camille's story reached your heart today, I want you to know it's not just hers. It's a story for every daughter who never stopped believing, every father whose voice was lost in a broken system, and every soul brave enough to say, "Not this time, not again." If this moves something in you, hit that like button to stand up for stories that matter. Share your own experience in the comments below. We're listening. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Black Women, where we honor the strength, the fire, and the grace that refuses to fade. Thank you for sitting with us through this story, for remembering Jeremiah Cole, for believing Camille. Let's keep shining a light together.